things. And I had one friend who was a wonderful Baptist who was my roommate, who strongly encouraged me always in my faith in God. So it was through this time that I started to pray every day in the Adoration Chapel, and I was encouraged by another priest who was a spiritual mentor to pray every day. And it was through this that I started to grow and started to hear the call of God in my life, but not just hear the call of God, but grow in my own self-esteem, right? Grow in my own happiness. And God took me and moved me from one place to an entirely new place that I had never known before, a new way of life that was so awesome. And of course, that was in 2008. So that's been 14 years since then. And today, I'm still learning to follow God's call every day. I'm still learning what the sacrifices I need to do are, what I have to sacrifice in order to follow God's call. And it's not been just this like easy journey. It has been a good journey though. I think we are all in the same boat together, aren't we? Every one of us has been called by God, and we come and we want to know what God's call is for us today. And we sometimes can get frustrated or confused because we say, I don't know what God's call is like, or do I know if he's really calling me right now? And how am I supposed to follow, especially if I can't see God? And it can seem, it's helpful, therefore, to learn a little bit about what God's call is. What is God's call like, right? What are the ways in which God calls us? So the scripture readings, I think, today speak to that. And so let's look at the first reading today from the first book of Kings. God calls Elisha, right, son of Shaphat of Abel Meholah, and to be the one prophet to succeed Elijah. The first point, I'd like to make 3 points about God's call. The first point is in this reading. It's that God's call is not something that we imagine, but actually comes from God, first of all. That's the first point. Sometimes we think to ourselves that God's call is if we say, oh, God called me to such and such a thing, and that must be like my imagination, or like, right, Jesus Christ is real, I know that, and he says he's the Son of God, and now the church teaches me this and this and this and this thing. How do I know that that's just not something I came up with to make myself feel better, right? The phrase opiate of the masses comes to mind that Karl Marx, I think, used, right? What religion is, right? Or Christianity in particular. But rather, God's call comes from God. We don't imagine it. God sent Elijah to Elisha. How did Elijah know where to find Elisha? Well, God sent him, and Elijah followed. And then Elijah called Elisha by placing his mantle over him, his cloak, which was the sign of his authority. He had not yet anointed Elisha. That when he anointed Elisha was when Elisha would then leave everything and follow him. But God called Elisha to follow, and Elisha followed. He left everything. He had 12 oxen, and he gave the flesh of the oxen for his family to eat. And then he followed God's call through Elijah the prophet. The second point comes from the second reading. And the point is this: it's God's call and action is unique and transcends our fleshly human experience. It's unique and transcends our fleshly human experience. In the second reading from the letter of St. Paul to the Galatians, St. Paul is encountering the Galatians who have received God's call in Jesus Christ, the call to freedom, meaning the call for the heart to be able to reach out to God and to be able to love without being hampered by death anymore, because death was destroyed by Jesus. Without being hampered by the power of sin in the world, because Jesus came to forgive sins, right? So these people who had received this call then were approached by more people who said, but wait a second, you actually need to become Jewish first. Why? Because it's more convenient, it's easier. Because you don't have to deal with the confrontation that's going to happen with all the Jews saying, well, we have to follow all these little laws about washing our hands and washing our beds, If we touch a dead person, we have to go wash ourselves for a certain number of days, and then finally we can come back into the community. Like, you're not doing that. What's going on with you? And it can be confusing. So to avoid that confusion and frustration, right, they say you should become Jews first, right? Become circumcised if you are men. And St. Paul is trying to encourage them. He's saying, what are you doing? The call of Jesus is a call for freedom from all that. Follow Jesus. You know, sometimes what we can do is we can get frustrated because when we're thinking about God's call in our lives, we think that his call is something that will lead us to more convenience. It will make things easier for us. It will make us feel better, and it won't be so mysterious, right? It won't be so transcendental to our physical human experience in our flesh, right? At least we can touch things with our hands. But the fact of the matter is that Jesus' call to these people is to be freed from all the wants and the desires and the needs of the flesh. Now that is very transcendent to the human experience, if you ask me. It's unique. And then finally, the third point is that God's call to humans is to a radical new way of life. A radical new way of life. Jesus Christ in the gospel reading, when the days for him being taken up were fulfilled, he resolutely determined to journey to Jerusalem. He set his face like flint, like it says in the scriptures, right? He was ready to go. He knew what was coming, his death. He determined to go to his death because he was on his mission. He was on a mission, and he determined to do that. He was following his Father in obedience to his Father. And then there's three people who come around, and they say, one says, oh, I'll follow you, Jesus. But I'll follow you, but I need to go take care of this other thing, right? Or, Jesus, I'll follow you, but what am I going to do if I don't have anything to eat? What am I going to do if I suffer? I can't suffer, but I'll follow you. And Jesus says, where I am going, I'm going to great suffering. Where I am going, I don't have any place to lay my head. At least until I die and then rise and then have rest, right? But where the Son of Man has nowhere to rest his head. And then to the other he says, follow me. But this one says, but I first need to go bury my father. And where Jesus is going, and where Jesus is calling this person to, right, is to of course meet, to be with his Father, but also to destroy death. This person says, I'll follow you, Jesus, but I'm so concerned about death that I need to concentrate more on that now, but I'll follow you part of the time, or I'll follow you afterwards, after I concentrate on death. Jesus says, where I am going, there is no death. He says, follow me, and I am leading you to life. So the third person comes along and says, I will follow you, Lord, but first let me say farewell to my family, because they are at home. Lord, my family needs me, right? My physical family. Jesus says, where I am going, there's going to be an entirely new family of people, the Christian community, the saints in heaven, the angels, the Holy Trinity, right? I am calling you to a higher family than your own family on this earth. The person says, well, but I'll follow you, but my family. Well, Jesus is calling 100% of the way. So Jesus calls us in God calls us, and it works in these three ways, right? First of all, it's not something we imagine, but something that comes from God himself. It is a unique and transcendental call, right? Transcendent to our human, physical, fleshly experience. And also, it is a call that calls us to a radical new way of life. Now, touching on those kinds of things that Jesus speaks about, you know, how many times have I heard someone say something like, well, I just as an example, I want to become Catholic, or I want to turn my life to Christ, but my family, right? I'm afraid of what my family will say, and I need to honor them, right? Well, Jesus is calling us to a radical new way of life. You know, if we were living a certain way all our lives, and then we hear like this new thing, right? The teaching of Christ, the life of Christ, and God even sends people into our lives, and we start to say, wow, this is new. There's so many times, though, where we say, but I like the old stuff, that old way of living. Can't I have my own philosophy about life, my own ideas about the human person, my own ideas about the human body? Can't I keep all that stuff? And I'll follow God. That's really nice. That makes me feel good. But I want to keep all my stuff. Whereas Jesus is calling us to subdue ourselves, to submit ourselves, if we would follow the call, to what he says life is, to his philosophy on life, on the human person, on the human body. That's a big call that Jesus makes for us. It's a large step. It's an entirely new way of looking at things. And it's leaving everything behind that we had, that we thought was important, and allowing Jesus to show us the most important things. I think that every one of us here who is called by God can do it. Why would Jesus call us to new life in himself and call us to follow him like that if it was not possible for us to do? That doesn't make any sense. It is possible. And Jesus himself says, the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. And we know that it's not always convenient. We know that it's not always easy. We know that it's not always understandable perfectly by us. It sometimes seems to be very mysterious. And yet, he still calls us. And in following Jesus, we receive everything we need. So today, when we're thinking about perhaps this child who is to be baptized, this child who is to receive her first communion, following the call of God,